Hi everyone, welcome or welcome back to Misinformation in Science and Society. Here to listen, not to judge. I'm your host Annie, and today with us we have Cailin O'Connor. Alright, so welcome. Could you please introduce yourself a little bit and what you do?
Sure. So my name is Cailin O'Connor. I'm a professor at UC Irvine, and I'm in this area called philosophy of science. But I think the thing relevant to you is I do research on misinformation, and especially my research focuses on social connections, social ties, people's relationships, and how that influences the way information spreads.
Yeah. So could you go into a little bit more detail about like the relationship between like philosophy and the study of misinformation?
Yeah, absolutely. So philosophy, one of the oldest areas of philosophy is called epistemology, which is the study of knowledge. And so a lot of philosophers work on thinking about like what knowledge is and how knowledge works. And then there's this related area called social epistemology, um, where the main recognition was something like, well, for most people, most of the time, the things that they know or believe are actually things that they learn from other people. So human knowledge systems are just deeply inherently social. And it's like this really sort of special ability of humans compared to, say, other types of animals to be able to share information and to share like really detailed information with each other. Um, so that's an area of philosophy. And then some of the work that I had been doing for a long time involved building models to understand, assuming that people get most of their beliefs sort of from other people or that their connections with other people shape what they believe. What kind of models can we build to think about, well, how might an idea spread from person to person, or how might someone getting evidence about something or data influence the beliefs of the people they know? So I've been building models to look at that kind of problem, which is a thing that makes sense to do in philosophy. And then as misinformation on social media became more prominent and started influencing these big public events like the Trump election or the Brexit vote, I started thinking about applying those kinds of models to like broader systems, for example, online systems, as well as, previously I'd been thinking more about in science, how does information spread?
Yeah. Um, so based on like the work that you've been doing, what are some of like the key factors that contribute to like the spread of misinformation?
Right. So there's a lot of things that contribute to it. So think of what I'm saying as like a list of some things that matter rather than like a perfect rank order of everything that matters. So one thing obviously is what we might think of as like our social network. So who has a relationship with whom or who is getting information from whom, that matters a lot. Um, so, you know, what friends do people have? Who do they listen to online? What sorts of media sources are they connected to? All of these are aspects of our social network where we get information. And so obviously that matters to what we believe because who you're connected to determines like who sends you information or claims and things like that. And then there's a bunch of other social stuff that matters. So we know that when people get information from someone else, it's not like they always just immediately believe it, right? So if I said to you right now, like, the rain outside my window is purple, you'd probably be like, I don't think so. Uh, so the things that determine like do I trust a piece of information from someone are things about first about the source. So who is that person telling me? Are they trustworthy? Have they lied to me before? Are they an expert? Do a lot of people trust them? And also, are they socially influential? Is it someone who I think of as like an important person? So all of that shapes whether I believe something from someone. And then different things about the actual information itself, like, is this information seem really unlikely to me? Does it not fit with my other beliefs? That shapes what I pick up. And then other things about my social goals too. So say someone tells me something and they're a person who I think of as really important, and I sort of want to impress them or conform with them or be part of their in group, then I'm going to be more likely to sort of trust or at least say that I believe the things they share with me. So that's just some of the social factors at play here.
Yeah. And what about like in like scientific communities? Like how does the structure of those impact the dissemination of like accurate information, the potential for the spread of misinformation?
Great. Yeah, so in some ways, scientific communities work like other communities in the sense that scientists are humans, like other humans. And so they're susceptible to a lot of the same kinds of effects or biases when it comes to the spread of information. So with scientists, like other people, if a really important or prominent or well-trusted scientist makes a claim, more people are likely to hear it because they tend to be central to a social network, and more people are likely to believe it because more people like trust that person and more people want to impress them. So in some ways, all of that is very similar. Of course, science is a system that's like grown and developed and evolved over time for the purpose of generating good information, accurate information, and then spreading accurate information. And that means there are things that are special to science that have been designed to do that. And I'm not saying they're perfect, but there are things like the peer review system and then journal publications. So, scientists submit their work for peer review and other peers read it and give feedback and decide should it be published. And if they think it's good enough, then they do publish it. So we can think of that as like a thing that is sort of part of our social informational network and is specifically designed to filter just good information through, sort of cut out the bad stuff and then just widely spread the good stuff. And as I said, it's not perfect, but it works to some degree to mean that the beliefs kind of coming out of science and in journals are going to be more accurate than what you might see without those kind of filtering systems.
Mm-hmm. And this kind of corresponds to what you were talking about earlier about like the social like what contribute to the spread of misinformation, but what are some like maybe philosophical tools or just like some like um strategies you have for like combating misinformation and avoiding them in like individuals' daily lives?
Great. So I usually, in thinking about combating misinformation or stopping its harms, I like to kind of divide this into two different things. So one is something like making every individual better at dealing with misinformation. And the other is like changing social systems to mean that there's less misinformation out there and it's less impactful. So a lot of people focus on this side, like how do we train people to have more information literacy or to identify fake news or to identify misleading online content. There's lots of things that can happen there. I don't tend to focus so much on this side myself. And part of the reason is that I think it's harder. It's harder to do, and it sort of pushes off responsibility from the people who I think ought to have responsibility for misinformation. So it makes it a problem of individuals. And I think if you look at a social media company, they're very incentivized to be like, let's make this everybody's individual problem. Users are the ones who ought to be responsible for controlling and preventing the harms of misinformation. But for that to happen, it's like we have to train every individual person to be good at identifying misinformation, and that's just really, really hard. So even as someone who does this like as one of my main research areas, I still can't always tell misleading content from accurate content despite lots of practice, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I like to focus on the other side, like how do we take all of us, and we're just kind of animals with some competencies and some foibles. How do we take all of us and put us into an environment where we're going to learn accurate information, develop good beliefs, and make good choices more of the time? Um, and for that to happen, it's a lot about uh, shaping media, shaping social media, shaping governmental response. And so if I'm saying like, what can you do as an individual to make things better? I'd say like put pressure on social media platforms, put pressure on the government, like communicate to people like what I want is a good informational environment where I can get good information and make good choices. And that's more important to me, say, than having a platform that's just like super grippy and keeping me on there all the time. Do you see what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Um, so with respect to like what kinds of things can make that happen, I mean, people talk a lot about social media algorithms and their importance in shaping what people see. Um, Now, social media companies aren't incentivized necessarily to make algorithms that like promote accurate information because what they want is to keep people on their platform, and those two things can be in tension. So the question for us is like, how do you convince social media platforms or require them to make the best algorithms possible? And I think the answer has to be some kind of regulation or government back and forth. And so I tend to think we ought to have something like the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, except for information environments. So a body that researches misinformation, thinks about media and platforms, uh, and then works with platforms to comply with guidelines for handling misinformation, decreasing it, spreading good information. I think something like that's a good idea. And then, I think you want the same sorts of things for traditional media too. And especially, I think our country should be thinking a lot about highly partisan media, especially highly partisan media that, shares a lot of misleading content. And like, do we want to have stronger regulations for that kind of media too?
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
That
And
was so much, Annie. I'm sorry. I was just like dumping it all.
yeah, that was great. So yeah, those are actually all my questions. You covered everything that I had for misinformation. So do you have anything to add about misinformation before I have just like two more questions just for fun?
Let's see. Do I have anything to add about misinformation? Um, so one thing that I'll sort of share that is just something I've been thinking about recently. Uh, so through talking with like a potential collaborator of mine, Joe Back Coleman, um, I've been thinking a lot more about misinformation research and the way that it's funded and shaped.
Mhm.
And one thing that's the case is a lot of research on platforms, empirical research on platforms is paid for by the platforms themselves or done in concert with those platforms. Um, and in addition, to get information from platforms, it's often the case that they have to be compliant or agree to share that information. And so it can be hard for researchers to get really like good content information about platforms and how they work. And so this seems to me like an area in science that's important. Like, obviously, we need to know what's happening here because we're seeing negative impacts for democracy and public health from social media. And so, for good research to be done on them, it seems to me like that research can't be done by platforms themselves or with strong influence from them. And so, I think that's one thing to think about.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah. All right. So, my two questions just for fun. The first one is what inspires you in life? Like what are some of your inspirations? And whether that's like a person, idea, book, anything. And the second one is if you have any advice for like people, especially like teens, about anything.
Wow. Okay. What inspires me? Oh my gosh. That's like such a big question. And there's like so many things, right? Uh, I mean, I think like my real answer is just like actually a very boring answer. Like, I'm a human like other humans. And, what really inspires me are like the people in my life who I see doing like so many kind and beautiful things day to day, like handling all the like sort of pains of life with like grace and kindness. And, that like that's the thing that always gets me. I'm like, I have to be a better person and do more. Uh I mean, for teens, do I have advice? Oh, you guys, I mean, I feel like it's got to be just a really hard time to be a teenager. And I feel like bad and guilty about that for you guys. Like, the climate change situation is really hard and terrible. And I imagine that is frustrating and scary to, like it already that was frustrating and scary for me as a teenager in like the 90s, and now so many years later and things haven't really changed. It's just getting worse. I mean, I like I grapple myself with thinking about like how do you live a life that's like a full good life in the face of something that's like existential and scary.
Mhm.
And it's not something that I have an answer to, but I guess like I would say, even living through a time where there's a lot of scary things happening, like you have to kind of like divide your mind between like I try to be like satisfied and at peace and like enjoy myself and like appreciate all these good things in life, even as I try to like change or grapple with all the hard and the bad. And maybe that's just like what it is to be human at any time. I don't
Mhm.
know. Do you have advice for me and all the olds?
Um, I guess just I like ask this question to everyone, but like I don't actually like think about it myself. Um, yeah, I don't know. Just like live just like every day. Just live life, I
Yeah.
guess. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess like what choice do you have, right?
Yeah. All right. So
Okay.
I think that'll be it for today. Thank you so much again for your time and insights. It was really nice talking to you and meeting you. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you, and thank you for what you're doing. It's just great.
Great. Yeah, have a great rest of your day. Take care.
Thanks. You too, Annie.
Bye.
Bye.